Welcome to Reclaiming Home, a podcast focused on delivering thoughtful conversation and tangible actions to make housing justice a reality in our communities. I'm your host, Asale Sol Young, Executive Director of Urban Homeworks, an educator, activist, and proud Turtle Papa. I'm a Black Legacy native of Evanston, Illinois, and a proud descendant of Haitians and rural Black and Indigenous North Carolinians. Join me as we take time each month to dive into all things housing, including potential policies, community dreams, persistent systemic barriers. We'll also celebrate success and everything in between. We are so glad you're here. Here at Urban Homeworks, we acknowledge that we live our lives and do our work on land that European colonizers stole from the Dakota people indigenous to Minnesota. In order for this theft to occur, sadistic acts of genocide, rape, and forced assimilation were employed. We also acknowledge that we live our lives and do our work on land that was cultivated and developed by bodies that European colonizers stole from West African countries through the transatlantic slave trade. In order for these thefts to occur, sadistic acts of genocide, rape, forced assimilation were employed. As we acknowledge what was taken from our collective human ancestors, we commit to work and fight for the liberation of the descendants of those enslaved through American chattel slavery and the sovereignty of all Native peoples. Welcome to Reclaiming Home, Housing Justice with Urban Homeworks. Today, I am so excited to be joined by my colleague at Urban Homeworks, our Equity and Engagement Director, Tammy Ogurinde. Tammy, thank you so much for being here. I'd love for you, your voice is newer to our podcasting audience. I'd love for you to kick us off with introductions. Who are you and how did you end up in this work?
Hey, folks. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Asale Sol. Yep, my name is Tammy, and I'm the Equity Engagement Director here at Urban Homeworks. How did I get here? Asale Sol is how I got here. I Minnesota native, been born and raised here, definitely caring about housing justice at an early age, housing justice specifically in my college years. So knowing I wanted to be in this space, and was very committed to using my time, my resources to do just that. So I wanted my work to be centered around how do we build housing equity? How do we build wealth through home ownership for people who has been systemically denied for decades, for generations? So started with Urban Homeworks. For a short while, I was Asale Sol, executive assistant, and then left, going to a few other organizations, still focusing on housing, social justice, to come back just a couple of years later to join the equity engagement team as the EE director. So it has been a wonderful welcoming home, and to do this work that I love and that I'm passionate about with the organization that is committed to doing it well, committed to doing it holistically with justice and community at its center. So good to be here.
Amen. And Ashe, Tammy. I will always say, so lucky to have Tammy. And I knew that from the day that I met Tammy years ago. So as a quick reminder, I'm Asale Sol Young. I use they, them pronouns. I am the executive director here at Urban Homeworks. If you're newer to our organization, we are a 28-year-old housing justice nonprofit. We began as a small volunteer-based organization and have flourished and blossomed to own 134 units of affordable rental property across Minneapolis, both south and north, and in St. Paul. We also develop homes for affordable sale, ranging from 60% of the area median income all the way up to 115% of the area median income, focusing predominantly on that 60 to 80% range. Community development is at the center of what we do. And so with that, Tammy, we have so many followers, listeners, supporters who are incredibly unfamiliar with the legislative process. I think it would be really helpful for us to kind of recap how this goes, because a lot of the learning also we were doing as we went ourselves. And so I'd love for you to kick us off, especially because this is your expertise, is policy and how to get the thing done. Can you just kind of start us off in understanding, I have an idea and I want it to become a bill. What then?
Yes. I love this, because I think the House of Rock, I'm just a bill type thing, so great and catchy and so flawed. so flawed. So kind of what you were saying about what does it look like to have this idea and make it policy. So to start off with, it doesn't need to be a new law. It could be an existing law that you want to change. It can be a group or coalition or just an individual. You have something you want to change and put forward. So you have an idea and you choose to do something about it systemically. So from there, you would go to an elected official to carry that bill.
And when you say carry a bill, I also appreciate that you named the different groups that could potentially be I'm going to make change at a statewide or government level. And I think it'll be, again, helpful for us to kind of talk about the pros and cons of entering into that world alone versus as a group. But when we talk about carrying a bill, what we really mean, right, is someone in the House as well as someone in the Senate that says, I support this legislation to the point that I will champion it as far as my peers allow it to go.
Absolutely.
So they might even also, and typically they'll even sometimes give input, right, into the language and how that goes. And they'll pull in the research side, because the government has its own research arm, right? The legislators have a research arm, which I think is also really cool and something that people don't necessarily think about. We think, I need to know all the things. I need to have a legalese mindset to craft this thing. But at the end of the day, largely we can have an idea.
Yes.
And if we can get a legislator to carry it, as you said, to champion it, then they'll help us define the language in a way that works for their process.
Exactly. So, I mean, you named it. The first part to even having a chance is first having someone in government say, I'm gonna take a chance on this. So you do need that chief author, or no bill is moving forward. So on the House side and the Senate side. So it's not just one bill moving through Congress, it's one bill moving through the House, one bill moving through the Senate. So you need to have a chief author on both sides who will carry this bill. And when we say carry it, again, you're taking it on, you're bringing it to the research committee, like you said, and you're also testifying and bringing it through the various committees as well. So you have the first reading and it goes up to the House or the Senate, but then from there, it goes to the specific committee that it pertains to. So housing policy, it's going to go to the housing side on both committees in the House and the Senate. If it's transportation, it's going through the transportation committee. If it's early childhood education, it could go either in education or family committee. So sometimes it can go to multiple committees. From there, if it has something to do with a finance piece to it, you're looking for funding, it has to go to the finance committee. If this policy has a piece of tax components to it, it's going to the tax committee after it's cleared through the respective House committee, transportation committee, police and safety committee. Then there's also So there's finance, there's tax, there's judiciary. So again, if there's a policy change, it has to go through the judiciary committee, be passed in order to make it through. So there are a lot of steps where policy can kind of be stopped in its tracks if it doesn't go through the necessary committees and is approved by those committees as well. So there's a lot of pieces to it that people don't realize.
That's like intense, right?
Yes.
Right. It's like, because we vision, we dream, and then we wonder how these good ideas that we know would impact our communities, like what happened to those ideas? Where do they fall short? And so I just want to reiterate to folks that like it is many audiences that your idea has to resonate with, which is why your own research is important. Equally important is who carries your bill, the relationships that they have, because like you said, they as an individual might sit on the taxation committee, but your bill needs to go through House and taxation in both House and Senate. They need to have strong relationships in taxation and in House and across to, like, if they're on the Senate, they need to have strong relationships in the House and vice versa, right? So it's very much a relationship strategy.
Absolutely. And even to touch on that, like the relationship piece matters and the advocacy piece matters. So we always say, you know, go vote. It's important to vote. And you have these people now representing you. What you might not know is, okay, now they're representing you in the House or the Senate, but then they're also representing you in these committees. So that's where it's really important to also engage, you know, our job, you know, we're building those relationships with these electeds and trying to move policy, but the everyday person has the opportunity to, when we say call your electeds, often it's like, you know, call them because they're sitting on the House committee and they have the opportunity to vote yes or no to knock a bill down or to move the bill forward. So when they're hearing from you that this bill matters, they serve you. So they're supposed to be responding based off the needs and desires of their constituents. So it's so important when there are bills moving forward, if they matter to you, to engage in that way as well. So they have to respond back to you next election. Why didn't you pass this bill when we said we wanted it, when the data showed it would impact us in this way? These are the ways that we can be engaging, and it's hard. And I think sometimes we have to acknowledge the ways the system is designed to be hard that removes engagement. But these are the steps and processes that we take to really move work through legislation. And it takes all of us. It really does.
It does, T. And to your point about electeds representing us in all of those incidences, you know, it also is the impetus for why doing research on candidates when they are running really matters. What is their view on taxes? What is their view on transportation, on housing, on education, on family? Because that's the first step to accountability, is like making sure that those that are aligned with the community's desires are the folks in office. And then we can say, now we hold you accountable to what you ran on when we push bills forward. If they don't get them passed, that's where we can have problems. But it's about the electeds being accountable to us, not vice versa. And I think that a lot of times the people, especially lower income BIPOC communities, we lose sight of the fact that in truth, we hold the power. But I also think our electeds lose sight of that as well. They forget who got them where they are, and they forget that we can remove them. And so I just want to like really put emphasis on that, particularly because our work is centered around BIPOC low income communities. And so part of me putting emphasis there is reminding our supporters that sometimes it might feel like the power dynamic is flipped, but in truth, if we're doing our homework on the ground, then the power dynamic sits exactly where it's supposed to in a democracy, in a republic. So Really appreciate the breakdown of this. I think the last couple of pieces that we should just name that we learned very much so in our process is that, like, you know, along the way of sitting in front of all of these committees, different electeds can edit.
Yes.
They can amend your bill, your language, and say, well, I will vote for this if I will vote for this when. And now suddenly there's another sentence or 5 that are describing something that make the legislators feel more comfortable with your vision. But I mean, ideally, right, they're not changing your vision. They're maybe just adding layers to it, but that can also happen at those different stages of each of those committees before final approval.
Exactly. So there are 3 reads of the bill, and from the first to the end of the second, that's where things can be amended. So in these hearings, in even behind the scenes, you know, there's an amendment being added for a lot of things we saw this year were things to be amended that included certain types of reporting or certain specificity on how funding is being spent. And they have the power to approve or deny those amendments. But by the time we get to the third and final hearing, it's the bill as is, yay or nay. So there's a lot of work in that time frame of trying to get amendments or trying to fight to keep the bill as is. But once we get to third reading, it's, are we accepting this bill like this, or are we saying no and trying again next year? So that's something that's so interesting to witness. And like you said, we were really hitting the ground running, learning as we go. But what was so unique about the year we were in was, you know, almost $18 billion surplus, unheard of, a trifecta in our Minnesota state legislature for the first time in decades. So there was just this fast-paced commitment to, we're moving this work forward, we're spending this money where there's been gridlock for years with the GOP holding the Senate and then the DFL holding in the House. Things just weren't being pushed forward. And we were not seeing that this year. You know, we're seeing like-mindedness, especially in the House committee, like-mindedness on, you know, we want this to be historic, and bills are being moved forward like from one day to the next. We're getting asked to testify. The bill's being moved forward tomorrow. Can you be there? Can you get your letters of support? So things were moving so fast. And I think what was so special was the commitment amongst DFL, like, this is something special and we're not wasting it. So like you said, when we go back next election year, we can say we held like fast to what our commitments were. So we said we were going to provide funding for this, and we did. It might not have been the amount, which we'll talk about later, kind of what got done, but there was this tenacity of like, we're doing something this year. We want to help community. Like we keep saying for years, there's a terrible disparity in Minnesota. We have one of the worst in the nation in home ownership between Black homeowners and our white counterparts. Let's actually do something about it. So things from hundreds of millions of dollars towards down payment assistance, things like even statewide voucher support, things like our bill, which so excited to touch on more, which allowed us to build homes and add to the housing stock, but actually make it affordable for low income BIPOC families to actually meet the need to do the thing that would actually create a pathway forward to start reducing those disparities. So that there was just a very beautiful, unique opportunity for which we entered in this year to do some historic, never been done before things that I'm excited to touch on now. But one thing to name is that unity and like-mindedness was necessary. If we didn't have that, if we had that same gridlock as years before, those bills would have stayed kind of stuck when it's like, okay, now we need GOP support here. So the amendments you were talking about, we might need to require a cap at 1 million versus 20 million, or down payment assistance, let's do 30 million instead of 176 million. or let's reduce taxes versus use this funding towards family, education, housing, things like that. So that's something that we also want to name when we hold our electeds accountable. We have to look at the holistic picture, because if, say, a Representative Agbaje is trying to move a policy forward, but is in a House committee makeup where the GOP leads it, it can easily be shot down. So it's so important and collectively for us all to engage and put in officials who care about this work and are intentional about moving it forward, so it can actually move forward from inception to now this bill is a actual law.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful point that you're making. And as a nonpartisan nonprofit, I do want to kind of pull us back slightly just to say that understanding the issues that people face on the ground is really what's key here. We found in our own process that there were a small number, but a number of Republicans that really saw the problem from the same perspective that we hold, that that housing stock, housing availability is one of the most significant contributing factors to housing disparities. And I think that for myself, that was a big learning for me. That Democrat or Republican, I'm less interested in at the end of the day, right? It's like, for us as individuals, I know for us as an organization, we just care about getting things done for our community. And we will work with whoever sees sort of resources and accessibility to those resources similarly to the way that we do. And so just really, shout out to Draheim for being bold enough to walk alongside of us when his party, the GOP, was in the minority. But that alignment and the understanding of the issues is pertinent. There are places where I think the Dems can grow and their understanding of what's happening on the ground, as well as there are places where the GOP can grow. So I just want to keep coming back to that. Just to wrap up this piece, and clearly we have so much we want to share with our communities. And so I think we are going to have, for those of you listening, a part 2 of this conversation to dig in more deeply. But just to wrap up quickly, so Tammy, it's once we walk folks through all these committees, we're going to assume that the champions, those legislators who are carrying the bill, have those relationships down pat. They're clear on the issues at hand, and they have gotten said bill, said idea through each of their committees. And now we're in the final, most exciting stages. This last step of going to the governor's office can have different outcomes. Break that down for us.
So that's a really good point and something to touch on here. So we kind of talked about, it goes through the House and the Senate. So now we're getting close to that final reading, and we see, in the House, there's a part of a bill that says, for instance, down payment assistance. I think that's easier to say. In the House, we're giving $176 million. In the Senate, it's only $100 million. So they both pass in their respective parties, but they're not the same. So what do we do to reconcile that? And we go to what's called conference. So now at this point, all the committees, House and Senate, come together. So the House committee in the House and then the House committee in the Senate come together and look at their larger omnibus bills and say, okay, we see these discrepancies. How do we make them the same? So conference is another opportunity for individuals, orgs, and coalitions to testify and name, include us in this bill, keep it as is in this bill. We are more aligned in the House, so follow the House, or actually the Senate is where we see the most movement. So follow the Senate here. But after those conversations, they come together and say, okay, this is what we are going to agree to. And now there's one bill. And from there, they go back to their the House and the Senate, and that's what's voted on. So if the House votes for it, then we're good there. And then if the Senate votes on it, we're good there. It goes to the governor's office, and now that is signed. And hopefully, again, with that like-mindedness, they're not vetoing it. That's a whole different conversation that comes back. But if there is agreement, which there was this year, it's signed into law. A quicker way is if when they are originally introduced, if they stay the exact same once they're passed, there's no need for conference. So it will go straight to the governor's office and be signed. That is usually not what happens, given that it starts, exactly. There's different thoughts. Again, they're working with different legislators that have different opinions on how the bill should go forward. So it almost never is identical. But if it is, it goes straight to the governor's office and can be signed. But what we saw in almost, I want to say in every committee, but again, in the House committee, which we were focused on, they were not the same. So they did go to conference, and then they reconciled the bill. It was approved in both the House and the Senate, and then it went into the governor's office to be signed into law.
Which is the most exciting moment, right? It's like the final piece, which feels so good. Other quick possibilities are that, of course, the governor can veto, like, let's just say in some crazy world, we've got a DFL-led House and Senate, but a Republican governor, and just less alignment.
Yeah.
You know, the governor could say, like, you all agree, but I wholeheartedly disagree, and so I'm going to veto this bill. And then the, committees can go back, try to scramble to get something passed. Or there's like a really passive process too, right? Of just like the governor's like, I don't need the pomp and circumstance of signing. We all agree.
Yep.
I do nothing. It still moves forward. But we love the pomp and circumstance.
Yes,
that's the celebration, right?
Yes.
That's the celebration. So we will thank you all for staying with us through all this sort of nitty-gritty, detailed discussion about the process. We really thought it would be helpful for those who are outside of the everyday of the process to really understand it. And for those of you that really like to read, reading helps to retain information for you. We will have this posted on our website. Podcasts are obviously wonderful for those auditory learners. So hopefully we did a good job in breaking it down.
Yeah, so like Asal and Sol said, 28-year-old organization, and we haven't always done policy work. It's something newer we've been engaging with. And so I really want to hear from you why you believe it's important that we went into this direction, and why advocacy in general is important for us to be doing here at Urban Homeworks.
Absolutely, Tammy. Thank you so much for asking that question. I think that it's really important to me when you think about a 28-year-old organization that claims to be community centered. It's really important that folks understand the journey to policy and advocacy work. When I started in the organization, we weren't doing policy work. And I think for myself, really honestly, in my identity, understanding that lasting change begins at the systemic level, at the systems level, at the government level, at the level that recognizes the history of what created the problems that nonprofit work is fighting to resolve today. I'm a student of African-American history. And so for me, history and the understanding of history is imperative to social justice work, to community advocacy work. And so that's really why we started to take a more active role in policy. What I'm really grateful for, is that I had the opportunity to do some learning around the ways to be involved in policy as a nonprofit, right? There's lots of rules. And so initially, a lot of what we did was about supporting the work that others led that was relevant to our communities, to the folks that we prioritize and center in our work, and then building the confidence and clarity to hire someone like you, like someone in your role and your expertise to say, okay, we're not only going to be a supporter, we're going to be a driver. And we're going to be a driver because we see the gap of community voice and elected official voice, referring back to our episode 1 of this podcast, where we kind of talked about what the process looks like, and reminding our listeners that the people really do hold the power. We can't continue to say that and then allow these barriers to exist between the people and the legislators. And so that was really the beginning for us, was like, on a basic level, are we opening a door for our residents who are lower income, predominantly Black and Brown communities, to speak directly to their elected officials? So it's really just about standing in our truth, and doing so unapologetically. And it's really, we could not, again, an ED and a board can have a vision. Vision can't get done without people like you, right? So I will always come back to that. And as I come back to that, I want to give you the opportunity, Tammy, to share with our listeners, what were the bills that, because you sit specifically, you're part of many coalitions in your work as our equity and engagement director. As the EE director, you are connected to our residents through our organizer role, through our volunteer role. And so talk to the audience about the different bills that came across the table and the ones that we chose to support, as well as, well, actually, let's focus this first part just on advocacy. What did we support and why?
Yeah. This was just a fun year to step into. Like we talked about in the last episode of the $18 billion surplus and having a trifecta at the state legislature. So some of the bills that we supported, and by support, this means, providing a letter of support, going and testifying to say yes to this bill. And then I'll touch on the bill we actually crafted and moved forward. So there's a little difference. So starting off with the Bring It Home bill. And again, there was a House file and then the Senate file, because it went in the House and the Senate, it moved forward. It was House File 11 and Senate File 11. That usually doesn't happen, but that was the case. And this was the state voucher system for our Minnesota renters. It modeled the Section 8 vouchers at the Fed level, but this would be state specific. Then there was the corporate landlord bill.
And that first bill is sort of in vernacular. Is that known as the Bring It Home? That's the Bring It Home bill.
So that's
sort of like a common vernacular. We talk about it as like the House and Senate file, but you probably, audience, has heard of this.
Yes.
As the Bring It Home bill.
The Bring It Home bill. There's been a couple years now, the whole Bring It Home campaign centered around this to get billions towards state voucher system,
which would impact the rural community of Minnesota, the suburban community of Minnesota, as well as the urban community of Minnesota. And I only pause you there, Tammy, because too often the discussion around affordability and disparity sort of pretends or postures that the issues reside in urban settings alone and not in rural or suburban communities. And the reason why this bill, Bring It Home Minnesota, has so much support across the state is because it's a bill that recognizes that, yes, there are some differences in the sort of topography of the urban setting and the rural setting, but the issue of affordability persists.
Absolutely. And I love that breakdown. And I can touch on just bill by bill why we chose to support this. Again, we see the direct impact that this could have on literally just our residents. But like Asol said, we're talking rural, we're talking suburban. Like it's not black or white, it's not rural or city, it's not GOP or DFL.
Yep.
Like housing should not be partisan. And that's something that really led us to support these bills, was the fact no one should have to decide between paying their food bill or their rent.
That's right.
And this bill would help alleviate that burden, ensuring that people wouldn't be paying more than 30% of their income towards this, which would allow them to, again, cover transportation costs, food costs, start building emergency savings,
right.
Start saving for a down payment, take your kids to camp.
That's right.
You know, go to Wisconsin Dells, because this like poverty mindset of, you know, only things that need to be covered should be covered. But like, what does it look like to have a family thrive?
That's right.
And what I love about this bill is it would create a pathway to help families thrive.
That's right.
And that's part why we supported the Bring It Home bill and will continue supporting the Bring It Home bill. There was and also want to acknowledge that it was Howard in the House and then Muhammad in the Senate carrying these bills forward. Then in the House, this was led by Representative Agbaje. Rep. Agbaje actually moved a lot of the bills that we also supported. Shout out to you, Agbaje, my Naija sister.
Yes.
Love it. But one of the bills, again, this was House File 685, and in the Senate File 365. But more commonly, the vernacular was just the corporate landlords bill. And this didn't have financials attached to it. This was a policy bill. And what this would do would significantly limit or fully eradicate the ability for corporate landlords or what's the word? These
outside investors,
institutions from buying up single family homes and by doing so would prevent the everyday Minnesota family or individual from buying that home. Because the reality is, even when interest rates were like 3%, when you're competing with institutions that can give you a $300,000 cash offer, a $400,000 cash offer, you can't compete with no matter how much down payment assistance you're getting.
That's right.
So this was really important, because when we talk about building wealth, you know, corporate landlords buying these properties are a direct threat to that. We also talk about how this nature of corporate landlords buying these properties, it extracts wealth from places like North Minneapolis, where you are seeing this ownership but not increased investment. They don't live here. They don't care about the neighborhood. So it's simply like, let me just raise the rent when I can, extracting that wealth from our families here, and it's profiting someone out of state. This is not good for Minnesota, period.
That's right.
Whether you live in North or not. And one thing that we want to name here, like Asol mentioned in the Bring It Home bill, like this is not solely in North Minneapolis area. I will name though that it disproportionately impacts a North Minneapolis, but the Federal Reserve did a report recently, and again, it's counties in Itasca, it's counties in Blue Earth, it's rural counties experiencing the same thing, that out-of-state investors are buying those properties, not investing in them like they should be, raising rents and extracting wealth from those areas as well. So when we support these bills, we have an intentional focus and commitment to our residents, our community here in North Minneapolis, also South Minneapolis, and St. Paul. But we also push for this because we know the statewide impact this will have. And this will help families outside of the places that we're focused on. But that bill would help push forward this idea that single family homes should be for families and individuals who want to live here, want to build community here and build wealth here.
That's right. That's right. And, one question that continues to arise in news press, local as well as national press, like the New York Times, for example, is the question of what happened to the starter home, right? Where are the entry level houses for that first time home buyer, that first time buyer family to come in at something that's affordable while they, as you said earlier, build their savings, build their access to greater credit, right? Credit scores grow, things like that. Where are those entry level homes? And where they are is with corporate investors. Which goes back to the housing stock issue, which we'll talk more about when Tammy talks about our bill, which I think is, we got one more, and then we get to talk about our work.
Yep. So the last bill that we supported, testified, and really pushed for, also chief author was Rep. Baje. So and so again, House File 12 and then Senate File 22, but this is down payment assistance. So we were pushing for over $176 million for down payment assistance for first generation home buyers. So again, the difference between first generation and then first time is like, I could be a first time home buyer because this is my first home, or could be the first home purchase in like 6 years. So there can be a time length to it. But my parents bought a home, or my parents' parents bought a home. Whereas first generation is, again, you were the first person in your family to purchase a home. And why that is important to denote is when we talk about tackling the disparities and just the reality of the systemic racism, all the way back to the GI Bill and funding that was being pushed in the 40s, was Black families were denied opportunities to build wealth, where white families were given those resources. So they have, again, the accumulated wealth to continue like buying homes, to help their kids buy homes, where that was denied. So being a first generation home buyer has significance here when families for generations were denied those opportunities.
And I think even what really strikes me about that era in our history is that white families were given this money when the cost of housing was, say, a year's salary, maybe 2 years of your salary, right? On average. So the houses in and of themselves were significantly more affordable than they are today. And then there was this additional government infusion of cash to deepen the level of affordability for those white families. And so families who were able to jump on that opportunity were able to see the cost of their homes grow exponentially over time, when Black and brown folks were still trying to figure out generationally how to enter into the housing market, right? So things like that are really, really important. And I think, not that it needs to be said, but, representatives like Akbaje are examples of our electeds that really understand the depth of these issues.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such an important thing to name. And I love numbers, and I love looking at houses. And to really contextualize that, there is a house on the market. I want to say it was in the St. Louis Park area, going on the market for $699,000. When you can track and see, so this family had stayed there, and when it was purchased, it was about $49,000. So when we talk about generational wealth, like that equity is going into that family. So when Asali Soul said back when houses didn't cost much, but they were still getting assistance. So if you're even getting just $5,000 to purchase a home that's $49,000, and then you just continue owning it, $199,000. So it's like, let's really think about that when we name things like systemic racism, when we name things like institutionalized racism and the harm that was done, the numbers really help us understand the actual impact.
That's right.
So then when we're saying, well, Black families were denied this opportunity, several Black families were denied the opportunity to accumulate that kind of wealth.
That's right.
So that's why these things, when we say equity, housing justice, housing equity, and we attack it at a systemic level, it's reasons like that. Like that's part of the why, and we can't lose sight of that. And for people who don't understand that, like, let's have these conversations and break down the numbers. Numbers don't lie. Numbers aren't partisan. So we really have to listen to fact here on why we push certain initiatives, certain bills, certain policies forward. That's right. And that's another reason why this bill was an easy yes for us to jump on. And it was just an amazing opportunity. You have to testify, to get our residents to send letters of support and testify if they could. When we talk about making things community centered, we want our residents there. We want opportunities to give them voice, give them space to say their piece, their mind, their opinion. But not only that, it was a great opportunity to have, this was centered around the Bring It Home bill, but to have our electeds come to our residents and meet our residents where they're at, because it can be inaccessible to testify. You're talking about a day's notice at 1 p.m. Well, I got work, I got kids to look after, I got things to do, I'm tired, and you gave me less than a day's notice. So this is an opportunity to create space to even have our electeds come to our residents and hear from them about what they dream and envision through this policy. And that was just a special thing to really push forward with the bills that we were supporting. But it was so great, such a fun opportunity, but it pales in comparison to actually creating our own policy. So our first year doing it, and one thing that's important to name was that Representative Gomez, after meeting with her and just, again, that alignment and desire to really push equity through housing, was being invited to push forward this bill and craft this bill. So it was our own direct appropriation, House File 2612, and then in the Senate File 3119. And essentially what this bill would allow us to do, we were talking about housing stock. It would allow us to create housing stock, whether that be through single family home, whether that be through condo, co-op, townhome. But this opportunity would allow us to build new or refurbish old. And we're talking about homes that could be the $400,000 to $450,000 level, but then sell it to a family at the $150,000 to $200,000 level. So families at the 60% area median income. So that allows them to actually afford that home ownership opportunity. So we're talking about, even with down payment assistance and a crazy interest rate as 8%, as some of these interest rates are going right now.
Still can't believe that.
It's insane. It is insane. But this would allow you to afford that monthly mortgage payment. So you can build wealth, but not burden yourself and go from being rent burden to house burden now with this mortgage payment. So when we talk about reducing those disparities, we're recognizing we need to meet families where they're at, and the data doesn't lie. And that 50 to 60% area median income was being missed consistently. And I just want to pass it off to Asal Sol to talk more about, why this bill, why it was important to, again, address 60% AMI, to do it through housing stock, to essentially craft the bill how we chose to.
That's right. Yeah. And definitely, we've been shouting out electeds through our 2 episodes. So absolutely want to give a very loud shout out to Representative Gomez for her clarity on the organization as it is today and the work that it took for us to get to where we are today. That's truly what prompted that invitation. And, I've told this to her directly, but we will forever be grateful for that faith in us. Essentially, to your question, Tammy, what people outside of development don't understand is that even in affordable housing development, everything we do it at market rate. There are no laws that say because we are a nonprofit, because we sell homes affordably, that we get to purchase materials and labor at an affordable rate. So when Tammy talks about that $400 to $450 cost of the home, Tammy's referring to the development of that home, the materials and the labor that go into building that home at a market rate is around $400,000 to $450,000. And we're thinking about things like efficiencies and ways to have a lessened impact on the environment, because not only are we thinking about the environment long term, but we're also thinking about the bills incurred by those families. And so these are all a part of the thought process. And so if you understand that first piece of what I just said about developing at market rate, what happens for a nonprofit affordable housing developer is we have to figure out how to fill the gap between what it costs to build or refurbish the home and what it costs to sell the home. So Tammy named numbers that were spot on. You develop at $450, you turn around and you're offering to sell it at $200,000. That's a $150,000 gap that the system currently says, okay, affordable housing developer, figure out how to solve that gap so that you can be sustained as an organization. And so just really I'm getting really nitty gritty logistical, and I'm sure that our amazing marketing and development team will edit some of this out. But it's really important that you all understand as you listen that you're leaving nonprofits and you're leaving affordable housing developers with a pretty hefty bag of debt. And there's a reason why the majority of new developers do not want to do affordable housing development, because of that hefty bag of debt that they then have to go figure out on their own. There's currently nothing in the system that says, we got you, you don't have to figure it out. And so for those that are going to want to question what I'm saying, I'm not saying that you can't apply for gap funding. You can apply to different government entities to help you fill that gap. What we've learned in our 28 years of doing this work is that no single entity will say, for these 5 houses, we got your full gap covered. Each of those 5 houses, we have to go to several government entities to say, can you fill 30K of this gap? Can you fill 50K of this gap? And then we have to cite the sources of where else we're going to get that money in order to get those entities to say yes, which the application process now takes away from the resources of actually building the homes for affordable sale. And I really want people to understand this. So that's one piece of this. The other piece of this is exactly what Tammy said, that given that reality, less affordable housing developers want to take that leap and develop homes at less than 80% of the area median income. Now, 80% is a smaller gap. 100% is a smaller, because 100% is still considered affordable housing, is a much smaller gap. And so you don't need as many applications for government resources to help you fill the gap. So there's an inefficiency built into the system that people struggle to acknowledge. And why it matters is because the majority of what we have found in the data is that the majority of South Minneapolis, particularly the Phillips community, and all of North Minneapolis, residents need homes at the 60% area median income level in order to be able to enter into home ownership. So we need to eradicate that barrier so that more developers say, I want to, and I'm determined to build homes for that population of people. So we were really able to bring all of this knowledge and expertise, this 28 years of work, our relentlessness around numbers and data, to Tammy's point. We're both data heads, like love it because you cannot deny what it says, and actually develop something that is responsive to it. So, when we first started the bill, we're like, okay, we're gonna really specify the communities that this work goes toward. And we looked at communities where nearly 50% of the community was making close to 40% of the area median income. So that's Phillips, that's North Minneapolis. Again, we say we want to close the gap. So where are the homes that are actually available to those people? They're not being built, not at the rate that they're needed. We also looked at other identifiers of those communities to say, like, these are areas where there is not only the current reality that their needs are not being addressed, but there's also a historic practice of disinvestment, of extraction. And so, we asked for $10 million. We landed at 5. The government said yes to 5. We're very grateful. We also recognize that 5 million is a starting point. Additionally, we recognize that in the same way that Bring It Home and the corporate landlord bill and the down payment assistance bills are statewide, that there is a place, because the needs are the same, for a statewide housing stock bill that addresses those lower AMI levels. And so we are really just getting started. And I have talked way more than I intended to on that piece, but I just kind of get ramped up about it.
No, it's good. It's good. And I think just breaking it down and helping people understand, again, not just the numbers, but the realities, because I think there are these just hot topic terms. There's just this idea of what it is. And when you're not in it, it's so easy then to question, well, why is that necessary? So right. I really do hope that this provides context and understanding of our why and why we push this forward. Like Asoysel said, we asked for 10 and end up getting 5 million, which again, I want to say our first year doing policy, this is a win.
We're grateful.
We're grateful. We're excited. We're so proud of what our small but mighty team accomplished in our first year.
That's right.
Like, oh, it was so amazing. Been giving shout outs all day in this podcast, and just recognizing both to like our chief authors, Senator Champion in the Senate, Representative Hussein in the House, for taking a chance on us. And say Hassan, I apologize.
Representative
Hassan in the House, choosing to say yes to Urban Homeworks and getting us through the necessary steps to get our bills through. Our chairs, so Chair Howard, for again meeting with us and taking a chance on us.
Chair willing to talk through our disagreements, giving us the time to convince him of what we were saying. Really appreciate that, because we know y'all have very limited time.
And open doors was just so amazing. Chair Port, for being a champion and ally.
Chair Port at Urban Homeworks, man, we are big fans. We are huge fans.
Just amazing. Like, again, I love just this idea. Again, where I come from, we really talk about it takes a village. And it took a village from our team supporting us when we were getting ready for testimonies and hearings, to listen to us and provide feedback, to all the residents ready to show up and show out, send letters of support, testify when they can. And for all the elected officials who said yes, who took a chance, like Senator Draham, for meeting with us and being willing to listen to us and collaborate and partner with us. It took a village, and I'm excited that this was what we accomplished in our starting point, and we're going to keep building for more. But so excited to share with you what we were able to accomplish on the bill we moved forward. The Bring It Home bill also did not end up getting the $2 billion, but got funding for it. But also want to add a metro sales tax was added, and this metro sales tax provides additional funding for these state vouchers. So this would help provide around 5,500 as a starting point for state vouchers. And again, still building towards more. The corporate landlord bill will continue working on it in the next legislative session. That was not passed. So we're still moving forward and working on that. The down payment assistance bill, asking for 176 million, end up with 150 million. So still a huge number that will help families get through some and overcome some of those barriers to owning a home. And then just again, that paired with our bill, so excited for the opportunities of getting down payment assistance, and then also being able to find a home that is affordable. I really hope you guys are as excited as we are envisioning just the opportunities to do something different that hasn't been done before. And it's cool to be a part of that change.
That's right.
And we're excited to keep building, but we are just relishing in this moment of what we accomplished this past year.
That's right. I really hope the state is celebrating, regardless of how you vote. The work done in housing it's historic. And I don't throw that word around. And it's something that we can all be proud of because we did it together. Like Tammy said, it really, this work for all of these bills, not just the one we put forward, but all of these bills took folks coming together, crossing the aisle, crossing the rural, urban sort of lines and saying, this is what we need as a state. And so, man, if you're listening to us, that means you get this, and that means you support it in some way. So just thank you. Really, thank you. So thank you all so much for sticking with us in this podcast on these 2 episodes on the legislative process and the process for our bill specifically. We're going to wrap this episode with just kind of a little short reflection on what we experienced in the process. Because as Tammy and I have mentioned throughout these 2 episodes, we were very much learning as we went. And we were not deterred by the fact that we were learners in the process, which I think also is a testament to the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And just like you said, we went into this, did you go into this with a certain idea of what it would be like, what the process was? And then based off what happened, has this changed your mind or opinion on policy making, legislative stuff, all of that?
Yeah, I think, Tammy, I feel like I learned a ton about how to make the sausage, as they say. I really learned a lot. And I think some of those learnings we have shared in the podcast, that relationships are really important. Recognizing that your advocates or the legislators that you have carry your bill really matters. Their relationships really matter. And then there's also the piece, this special thing that I think I got to learn, which is that there's also a sort of magical element around the elected's willingness to try something new, to take a chance. It's really easy for elected officials to not want to do that because it could work out against them. And so folks want to get reelected, right? And so sometimes they can be really hesitant to take a chance. And I think, we kind of came in as this young, very persistent, but radical Black-led organization. And we were both often surprised when elected officials were willing to see us and hear from us and really understand the way that we do our work here. So they're willing to believe. Those are some of the really special moments for me that there's no way I can anticipate that.
Yeah.
Right? Like in my mind, I'm like, oh, everything's a fight. Like this is going to be a fight. We've never been in this fight before. So we don't know when you punch with your right and when you should uppercut with your left, right? We don't know when you should step back and go on the defensive. again, learning how to make the sausage as we were making it. I think that the other piece that's a little less positive for me that I learned was the extent to which these processes are not intended to support everyday people. There are a lot of logistical pieces around parking, around the reality of even just like where the Capitol is, and like the access to that space, the access to our electeds, again, the folks that we empower to represent us. Schedules are insane. I think that if you don't have people that can hustle to get on an elected schedule, there is a large chance that you won't get on their schedule, even though you're responsible for them being in office and you're responsible for removing them from office if you see fit. And so what was interesting for me in this process at the state level is that we're also going through some processes on a citywide level. And so this learning was compounded for me. It was like, okay, both on the city and state level, if you're an average person who has a belief in something, it is incredibly difficult to move your ideas based on our current structures and systems. So I hope that as we continue our learning and our leadership in this space, that we're able to start to influence how these processes go. Because as we always talk about, it is not about our voices. It is about us uplifting the voices of the communities that we serve to say that they're just as valuable, if not more, than we are. They really give us all. If you're an elected, they give you the power. If you're working in nonprofit, they give you the relevance, right? So the people are vital in this process, and we need to be open to them. So with that, and maybe I should have ended on a positive, but Tammy, I'm going to ask you, from that perspective that I even just named, if someone is bold enough to want to try this process on their own, what advice would you give them?
One, do it. It's so important to have people who care, people who, again, are on the front lines, live these experiences to name types of policy that should move forward. I'm honored to work and have the opportunity to meet with residents and hear from them. But not everyone has connections to people who this is their job. So we need you. We desperately need you. And I say this still naming that it's hard. It's an emotional roller coaster, which I saw this name, like one meeting, we'd be like, wow, did that just happen? Like, this is great. Another meeting, it's like, this isn't going to happen. The bill's dead. Try again next year.
They don't get it.
So it's a roller coaster, and it's hard. And like I named, like, don't do this alone. I bring in the community who also there's alignment there. Get to know the legislative assistants, because whoa, you are all superhuman, superheroes handling your electeds' schedules and agendas, but really get to know these legislative assistants and trying to get time on calendars. That matters. Like Asol said, the relationship building, get them to know you, your name, that you're their constituent. And then it is a hard and inaccessible process, but when we have to continue working in to be able to change it. So we need more of us in these processes, in the legislative work, and honestly, be in the position to be the elected to try and change it up. Like, we want you in there. I want to be voting for you.
Yeah.
So it's so much about voting and who you're voting for, getting to know the elected and building those relationships and naming the policy they should support, and also telling them the bill that they should be crafting to move forward. And then y'all, like, being these electeds, we need more people who care and who are committed to community, to be the electeds that are committed to initiatives and innovative ideas to move forward.
That's right.
So we need you in more ways than one. But it is hard and it is exhausting. And know that there are thousands, if not millions, of people who are are impacted by it. So really, I think the first thing is knowing your why, because there will be times where you're like, why am I doing this? Like, I want to be done. But knowing the families that we get to support, and I'm like, it's worth it.
That's
The late
right.
nights trying to
That's right.
craft the testimony for the next day, exhausting, but so worth it.
That's right.
The roller coaster, it was so worth it, because every
right.
day I knew who this was for. So again, just knowing your why, I think, will be the most powerful thing to get you through. But building those relationships is a close second to actually be able to move the policy forward, or even seeing, are there orgs that can give backing and credibility, letters of support. Like, there's a huge thing, that process to it. And I recommend going to our last podcast to get familiar with that process, to know, like, these are the steps to get a bill forward, and know that at each step required 18 different meetings or emails or phone calls. And then we make it to the next step, and there's just as many meetings and phone calls, and then you do it again and do it again, at each step. But then you celebrate when it is passed.
And sometimes the celebration is delayed. And I think one of the things that we had decided, that I decided when I was willing to step back and recognize the hustle of myself and my team, was that we were going to celebrate regardless, because we relented. And sometimes you get a no. And we got no's along the way, to be very clear. As Tammy referenced, there were moments when we were like, this is it, we're done, we're out. But we relented, we persisted. And I think that for individuals who are bold enough to say, I'm going to try this, to honor yourself and that work and that hustle, regardless of the outcome, because if you get defeated on the no, you won't try again, and your voice matters. So I just really want to just to acknowledge that, because the process isn't set up for us to just hop in and do this. So if you persist, that is a celebration.
Absolutely.
With that, we're going to go ahead and wrap it. Thank you so much, Tammy, for being my guest on these 2 episodes. How lucky, how fun. I had such a great time speaking with you. We want to give a quick shout out again to the folks that have supported us in this process, starting from Representative Gomez, your faith in us, your push to get involved in the process, to Representative Hassan, who was our first chief author, who said, I got you, let's take this all the way. The representatives within the House who supported us, including Representative Akbaje. I feel like you are actually better at maybe naming more of those representatives, but I'm gonna keep it rolling. We also want to shout out our Senate support, beginning again with Senator Bobby Joe Champion, who really believed in this and was willing to push it on the Senate side. And then again, just a big heart shout out to Representative Port, who chairs the Housing Committee in the Senate. We are eternally grateful. Thank you also to those of you who have stuck with us through these 2 episodes of the podcast. Please follow us on social media if you don't already. We are at Urban Homeworks, so at the name of the organization, and that's all of our platforms: Facebook, Instagram. I'm not a Gen Z. Are there any other Twitter? Twitter exists. People still use it, and that is very much a millennial platform. Interesting. As well, we can also be followed on LinkedIn. So please check us out. Please continue to leverage your resources for this work in this year. We talked about our $5 million appropriation to give clarity around that piece. That $5 million explicitly goes toward housing development. It does not support the general operations of Urban Homeworks. It simply allows us to add on the housing development work that we already do. So we're still needing to fundraise and sustain ourselves as an organization. So if you have the resources to contribute to this work, please do so. Please continue to do so for those of you who have been in this with us all of this time already. We are so grateful for you. And I think that those are the only actions I'm going to ask of folks today. We always give you some actions. List is short this time. And with that, I hope you all have a wonderful day and enjoy this beautiful weather. If you're living in Minnesota, it is amazing outside. So get out there and enjoy it. Peace.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Reclaiming Home, Housing Justice with Urban Homeworks for today's discussion. If you like this podcast and want to support Urban Homeworks housing work, head over to www.urbanhomeworks.org/donate to make a gift, attend a future event, volunteer with us, or learn more. Until next time, remain connected and informed.